Would you like to share jokes with Bach? Then accept cordial invitation from this master teacher for all musicians and especially for all students of his scores to fun, enjoyable, emotionally satisfying and engaging lesson in polyphony, designed by Bach in the form of fugue that makes funny parody on dogma of his time. And it presents the most unique opportunity to learn the skills of self-reflection through self-deprecating humor. And now, the scaffolding makes it quite simple to enjoy Bach's example of innovative alternative to the dull and tedious polyphonic studies, dictated by the dogma of his historical period. It is now available thanks to graciously shared insights by Rosalina Gutmann in her new insightful, easy-to-download ebook, Paradox of Invisible Dissonance in Fugue Parody by J.S. Bach. Presented in this condensed to the basics ebook information serves as the urgent didactic update related to the textbook changing and rather sensational discoveries. Author's unique perspective of piano instructor allowed for her resonance to Bach's similar didactic aims that informed his compositional mindset, allowing to fill in this gap in Bach's scholarship. The author, Rosalina Gutmann, had been internationally recognized for fostering prodigious success of young students. That defies common low standards in education. Readers will be guided through identification of defiantly employed dissonant sonorities, such as jazzy cluster chords that had been left undetected in various analyses publications and acclaimed recordings of the piece. And sadly, the metaphorical meaning of satirical musical humor that prolific composer expressed with unconventional for his time compositional devices had been missed in the plain sight as well. Bach's genius intuitively forecasted the emergence of the modern musical language of jazz and contemporary music. However, paradoxically, the mere mention of such defiant dissonance revolt had been left unidentified and missing in most textbooks and didactic aids due to the oblivion over these emboldened for attracting attention sonic surprises. And as the result of rediscovery of the fugue's parody meaning, the achieved emotional resonance allows for this liberated from emotional confinement, didactic exercise to serve as the effective container for authentic self-reflection through embodiment of otherwise hard-to-grasp cognitive dissonance. Due to the critical importance of development of the musician's skills for creating emotional resonance, Bach included this lesson in the form of his parody on dogma of his time into his monumental didactic cycle, Well-Tempered Clavier. And it was fortunate for music and musicians, since it helped to preserve this tiny maverick of didactic scaffolding from being lost and deleted by political correctness. And this liberated from distortions Fugue serves as his laughter manifesto. It brings alive the spirit of its inventive creator for sounding the alarm about restoring and preserving musicians' core capacity of creating important counterpoint to the observed impact on many musicians by the powerful slave master of zombification that did not discriminate for their celebrity status. Indeed, all musicians and their audiences deserve to rediscover hidden in plain sight score facts that had been missed in most textbooks and didactic aids that serve as the key to unlocking Bach's own lesson on how to oppose senseless dogma with joy and fun by using nuanced dynamics. The aim of this practical, hands-on didactic exercise, uniquely designed by Bach for his own students, is to help them to develop the skills for increasing emotional resonance with their audiences. Readers will witness the link of zombification and cognitive failure that was reflected by the unique design of this fugue, serving as the alarm for emphasizing this top priority in music education. That is why all music educators will appreciate the chance to take this Bach's laughter test for emotional resonance. The author, Rosalina Gutmann, had demonstrated earlier her intellectual leadership by organizing international symposium on advocacy for music education through compliance of educational policy to the research on the transformative impacts of music on the brain. And her familiarity with related data helped her to appreciate Bach's intuitive arrival to using music for promoting harmonious bilateral brain function that is the key for the formation of the integrative whole brain balance patterns of cognition. After experiencing the shift of consciousness, As the result of emotional infusion of Bach's polyphony, intended by composer with neuroscientist's mindset, she developed deep appreciation for the significant positive impact of his intuitive innovations in polyphonic style. It is the result of the emotionally and analytically balanced engagement of the brain that restores and nurtures interhemispheric balance, essential for optimal cognition. And such transformation on the global scale has become existential for humanity in the face of the increasing global threats. Since most of Bach's scholars are detached from hands-on practice of music, there are core aspects of his legacy that escaped from their comprehension. That's why author's personal and professional resonance to Bach's own daily life and duties of music teacher allowed for the grasp of rather obvious realities of her colleague extraordinaire. For example, the fact that Bach was forced to accept the job offer for music instructor and cantor and stay at that position for the rest of his life, despite the low pay and harassment, based on the lack of valuation, after several other musicians refused it, was the result of character assassination with the unfair stigma of convict. Indeed, the ebook is certain to surprise the global family of Bach's devotees by pointing to the direct link of this fugue parody with the traumatizing for composer abuse of power causing his suffering from the false imprisonment, in senseless retaliation to his innovations in using music for promoting emotional freedom, essential for optimizing cognitive function. Such actions to elevate consciousness were seen as interfering with the contrary ambitions of the ruthless dominant elite, aiming to continue to treat the people as the mindless herd of sheep. The lack of music-based experiential knowledge about interconnectedness of all matter in our universe, due to vibration being at the core of all matter, is the cause of many divisions in the society. And even majority of music educators are not familiar with this primordial essence of existence in our universe. Bach's unexpected personal encounter with the systems of justice and law enforcement was eye-opening. It allowed for him to dwell among the least privileged populations, and it afforded him the insider's glance about the plight of being victimized by the mockery on justice. And his fugue in the style of parody on the senseless dogma for the rules of composition provides the soundtrack with the striking symbolism of the cruelty of the comedy of absurd of being the victim of moral atrocity culture that had been normalized by the power institutions of monarchy regime. However, today, Bach's call upon the students of his scores to join his laughter reminds that musicians have the unique power to create resonance to the underpublicized good humanitarian causes, to shed the light into the dark corners of the remaining flawed just us system. Despite passing of several centuries and the fall of monarchy, today's unofficial name of just us system reveals its shocking remnants of the unchanged privilege of wealth over the truth and logic. And facilitating it, public servants are encouraged to commit crimes by unconstitutional impunity from being held responsible for crimes and misconduct. In fact, this monarchy feature erodes morale at every level of public service, from the park rangers, to police officers, to judges, to the elected officials. And in addition, shameless bribery that has been legalized and normalized into political campaign contributions paralyze the rule of logic and common sense by interfering with legislative process of creating the laws that affect millions of people. But the benefits of public good cannot be replaced with the rule of corporate wealth without terrible repercussions for all in our interconnected universe. For example, discussed above, zombification among population is exasperated by hormone-disruptive toxic materials that were illegally legalized and normalized for the use of many consumer products that should be banned. But, due to paradoxical blind spot, they are not. And the addendums present important for all eye-opening content on hands-on multidisciplinary applications of the illuminated by Bach observations in the area of environmental justice related to the psychological drivers of the anthropogenic global threats, with existential importance for all and for everyone. That is why rediscovery of Bach's fugue parody and its impact on perception of the rest of his legacy comes at the time when it is needed the most. This parody soundtrack allows to condemn injustice with the public judgment administered by sobering laughter to scold institutionalized cognitive dissonance of committing incivilities towards the most vulnerable among population by the shameless abusers of authority. Bach's effort to empower the students of his scores with the ability to create emotional resonance to injustice through humor and other means of emotional resonance expression is certain to help to expose ruthless power abusers for committing institutionalized crimes of deliberate infliction of emotional distress while vilifying the victims of social inequality and glorifying the abusers taking advantage of the least privileged, and hypocrisy about institutionalized crimes against underprivileged individuals who need just the contrary to hostility, compassionate care, is the evidence for the premeditated nature of such anti-constitutional crimes that have the same origins of hostility as the crimes of the jailed convicts. Both are linked to disability to rise above maladaptive incivilities of fight-or-flight instinct. 3 centuries after injustice towards Bach took place, there would be no protections for this impoverished musician today from such incivility of the predatory minds. But now, we've come so close to the point of the collapse of our civilization when humanity can no longer afford the consequences of the resulting dominance of self-defeat consciousness. From the pedagogical perspective, this fugue is the stellar example of Bach's riveting inventiveness for creating very effective scaffolding by using humor as self-rewarding didactic tool. It exhibited his superb polyphonic technique, allowing for integrating into the fugue format his intricate music humor and creating satirical meaning of parody on dogmatic zombification of music that was symbolic of common state of mind, that was essential for sustaining the cruel regime of monarchy during his historical period. Among the surprising discoveries, readers will examine the technical logistics of the creation of the sense of music humor, allowing for the fugue to serve as the excellent container for embodied self-reflection on cognitive dissonance, as well as for its resolution through self-deprecating humor. Such complex task is enabled by the use of dissonant sonorities that were defiantly employed by Bach. But, despite all odds, they were missed in the plain sight by many musicians, including acclaimed analysis publications and iconic recordings by celebrity performers and their large audiences. And this ebook serves as the urgent didactic update warning against using these flawed didactic aids. One of the reasons why such important tool for achieving clarity through emotional freedom had been invisible to millions of musicians is due to the tradition of political correctness that deleted parts of his legacy of the advocate for humanity who was forced into the struggles of prisoner of conscience. And along with enjoyable musical humor, this fugue is Bach's daring proclamation of the freedom of expression through music that is the most essential for all musicians feature of music communication that is enjoyed by today's musicians of all genres. But it had been taken for granted most of the times. Very few among today's music makers and their audiences realize that 3 centuries ago Bach took risk to fight for this right for the free expression embodied through music. And his lifelong battle of the passionate advocate for humanity clashed with powerful proponents of the dogmatic rules of music composition that insistently prescribed zombification in music and beyond. This, nurtured on subliminal level state of mindless sheep mentality, created the fertile grounds for the obedience, which is essential for sustaining the privilege for the whims of oppressive monarchy regime. And Bach's public display of his defiance of unnatural yet conventional emotional detachment in music was the instrument for ushering the most daring shift of consciousness. Bach knew the risks, and yet the visionary consciousness transformer with neuroscientists' mindset also knew the importance for taking such risks, unlike most of his contemporaries. And that is why his false imprisonment in retaliation of his pursuits of innocent catalyst of change through music only fired up his passion. No, Bach committed no crime, but by presenting the notice of leave to his mindless employer, he demonstrated refusal to submit to censorship by mediocrity. But the Duke of Weimar had many reasons to be afraid that such moral indignation expression could serve as the example to other underpaid and treated with brutality musicians of his court, and instead of correcting what is wrong, he abused the messenger of change. Despite his distinct musical gift, Bach was mistreated with injustice, common for millions of other musicians of the past and the present. The ill-minded Duke knew well that while mounting this assault on the good name of Bach, he could take advantage of the normalized financial inequality of his genius victim, since Bach could not afford legal defense from the dire human rights violations by ethically impoverished member of wealthy elite and his cronies. That is why Bach became the victim of not one, but several crimes, while having no hope for a mere apology. If Bach was to manifest into our reality, he would be shocked from learning that the society's power institutions had done nothing to shield musicians from the suffering from the same plight of devaluation. And as the result, the majority of them are still unable to afford the effective legal defense for much-deserved reparations for suffering from the crimes, as well as from the lack of societal justice towards consciousness transformers, with the unique passion to share their musical gift for elevating consciousness. And if these true biographical details about Bach would have accompanied every performance and recording of his music, it would be aligned with his passion for justice. Instead, the betrayal of Bach's strive have brought much-needed spotlight to still remaining chronically unfair and cruel persecution by the same type of means of the devaluation of the intangible nature of music, and by limiting impoverishment of the members of the profession of musician whose impact on consciousness cannot be touched. The plight of struggling with the false month-long imprisonment to already existing limitations of the marginalized profession of consciousness transformers was the devastating for Bach and his family blow in his unequal standoff with the senseless mindset of immoral incivility. But this undeserved public humiliation by unfair confinement was only a pretext to the vicious scam to trigger the lifelong witch hunt against genius musician, subjected to stigma of the undeserved label of convict for the rest of his life. Indeed, millions of his die-hard fans deserve to know this inconvenient and sobering truth, so they could follow Bach's call to pursue with the same passion for justice his lost battle against the remaining dominance of consciousness, of primitive oversimplification of the complex aspects of human existence. And now, this fugue with the spelled out with music notation laughter of Bach serves as his laughter manifesto. It helped to break through the distortions by the tradition of political correctness, helping to liberate the entire legacy of this visionary music genius of all times. Today's German music education researcher Sandra Sinch-Goofy shared with international community of music educators who serve prison populations the roots of current lack of mandatory music education in taxpayer-funded prisons, misleadingly called corrections facilities. The earlier policies of eugenics used by the active members of Nazis' elite who managed to remain in authority positions in psychology field long after the end of the war denied treatments to mentally ill individuals who were held in prisons. This provided a clue for the roots of the tradition of withholding of the important information about Bach's hands-on work with at-risk youth that likely involved counseling on emotional challenges at the school at St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. The e-book empowers the readers with unfairly underpublicized information that should have been disseminated long ago due to being foundational for understanding of the essential and existential role of using music for elevating consciousness and other health benefits, when following the exceptional example of effective use of Bach's applied tool for advancing the mind. The addendums of the ebook bring the spotlight on the observations by Professor Candace Pert, shared in her book Molecules of Emotion, accompanied by preface by author of close to 100 books on consciousness, Dr. Deepak Chopra. Her testimony about observed involvement of the joy neurochemicals in all intercellular communications being regulated by the vibrations of matching frequencies is the invaluable for all musicians information. It helps to understand foundations for the effectiveness of the experienced by the author interventions with music-based emotional reawakening that effectively broke paralysis of the collective blind spot of paradox of invisible dissonance. Bach's compositional design, involving intuitive use of musical humor as the didactic tool to reward students with double dopaminergic effect, is evident of mindset of neuroscientist of this brilliant music educator. Ebook offers easy-to-follow scaffolding for guiding readers through examination and witnessing of rather sensational phenomenon of staggering widespread collective blind spot over the ability to detect defiant of dogma, dissonant sonorities that composer emboldened, in addition to violating conventional rules for emotional detachment. And the resulting effect of violated musical predictions leads to the effect of surprise, with similar to tickling instinctive response of laughter. Such enjoyable alternative to the stereotypically boring and dry polyphony studies, along with the exercise on self-reflection for cognitive dissonance through self-deprecating humor, has been amiss in various types of didactic aids. On the contrary, this violation of the dogmatic rules make this piece stand out, since it is actually evident of his own didactic aim to confront zombification that he spelled out with notation. This Bach's appeal to the students of his scores in this Laughter Manifesto calls all forces of progress to join his fight for the freedom of expression by confronting the dogma for emotional confinement that was dominant during his historical period. But this unhealthy tradition is the relic of pedagogy from the Dark Ages. Of course, indoctrination into subliminal zombification does not belong to democracy-oriented society. But since this emotional confinement had been imposed through exam standards on the today's musicians who perform his music, starting from early childhood at the level of beginners and throughout all stages of life and career, including celebrity recording artists, it led to the observed blind spot of paradoxically invisible dissonance involving many musicians. In fact, this fugue is the laughter test for all musicians of all genres for their capacity of emotional resonance to the sense of humor of the composer. The fact that Bach had to fight for it so hard while taking tremendous risk, while living the life as the prisoner of conscience, should be shared by his devotees and die-hard fans. And every musician deserves to know of Bach's fun exercise to achieve heart-centered resonance in music. Readers have the rare chance to observe the paradoxical perception phenomenon of collective blind spot that has the staggering power of maladaptive self-defeating conformity, which had been indiscriminate of academic titles, awards of distinction, acclaim, and fame of celebrities. Rather sensational discoveries related to this tiny maverick of didactic scaffolding include the achievement of the deeper understanding of the involved inner mechanisms of moral atrocity culture on the perception and cognition due to maladaptive, conformity-driven pressure to practice self-defeat that had been illuminated by Bach's genius. Bach's intricate design of this fugue provides self-rewarding encouragement for the performer to use emboldened dynamics accent for emphasizing the prohibited from used dissonant sonorities in order to make their clashing effect easier to distinguish. And if the student is able to enjoy its humorous expression, it means they succeed in teacher's assignment. Such self-rewarding and self-motivating teaching does not need grading, along with its damaging impacts on students' self-esteem. That is why, once the proponents of the senseless exam standard for historically informed performances enjoy shared with Bach laughter and fun of emboldened dissonance, they would likely give up insisting on limitations on dynamics and making their Bach's performance sound as dull as a typewriter. This laughter intervention with zombified state of mind that led to collective cognitive failure among many musicians with distinct talent provided sensory-augmented evidence for the observed correlation of three elements. Number 1, emotional repression. Number 2, sensory deactivation. And number 3, cognitive failure. And the tangible form of recordings and publications for the deeper reflection of the inner mechanisms of self-defeat allows to examine the related data and use it in a variety of ways. The name Bach sensory deactivation effect for this observed paradox honors Bach's unique design of his didactic fugue parody that was instrumental for this depth understanding of inner mechanisms of self-defeat. Contrary to sensory augmented data based on the unique design of Bach's fugue, the data captured earlier lacks specifics and is rather general in the original studies for textbook classic concepts of social influences involving pressure from groupthink, misused authority, culture of moral atrocity. Such deeper glance on inner mechanisms of self-defeat offers solutions to left unsolved earlier problems. This Bach's lesson also serves as the sobering awakening call about the major crisis of zombification in the field of music education. And while it demands for urgent remediation, it is the urgent and evident reminder that the freedom of emotional expression in music may not be taken for granted. it needs to be cultivated and inspired as a part of teaching method while being the supreme goal above all technical tasks. In fact, emotional expression may not be left untapped without losing mental clarity due to sensory shutdown of eyesight and hearing. Bach's prolific genius deserves much spotlight and honor for creating such unique design of this fugue that rewards emotional resonance with the joy of shared with the master teacher laughter and allows for self-reflection insights. Various observed by readers flawed didactic aids that miss mere mention of such dissonance like cluster chords made evident the link of emotional detachment and significant cognitive malfunction. And this reawakening is the reason for the college discourse that attracts more and more participants. Despite the distance in time, Bach calls for urgent actions upon his colleagues' music educators to overcome the current oblivion over the crisis of zombification in music education. It demands for the urgent response by the leadership of institutions with the duty to assure that music curriculum is compliant with health and safety studies. The demand for the official declaration of zero tolerance to forced emotional repression in Bach's music must be produced with no more delay as the alternative to archaic approach to pedagogy by misusing it for indoctrination into zombification that is the fertile grounds for cognitive failure to notice the absurdities of the oppressive regime of monarchy and its institutions of executing institutionalized cruelty to the least privileged among population. Even an extra single day of such pathological approach is damaging, especially for child's fragile psyche. Under no circumstances, music education may not have requirement for cognitively dissonant approach, especially when it comes to music of Bach, that is the cornerstone in music education. That is why compliance to such data demands that no excusology is prioritized over the above health and wellness needs of students. They deserve to be shielded by responsible institutions from the lifelong blocks to greatness by entraining cognitive dissonance from imposed double standard. Bach's prolific strive of consciousness transformer demonstrated resonance to the modern studies that provide information on the significant danger of the emotional repression. And in addition to the evidence in Bach's notation about his didactic exercise to avoid emotional repression in music, the ebook lists the citations of references resonant to Bach's own strive. That is why camaraderie of all forces of progress with the strive of Bach's paradigm-changing ingenuity is critical and urgent. Share now his laughter at the senseless universal enemies of zombification and hostile resentment and retaliation to change that promote the spread of moral atrocity culture. Get the new ebook at 25% discount now for the limited time during book launch offered in celebration of camaraderie. See info on how to apply discount e-coupon in the description of the YouTube channel and use it at the website paradoxofinvisibledissonance.com. Show camaraderie by sending your feedback and testimonials. And remember to include your own publication or project that would be featured to the attention of the global family of Bach's fans. And join ambassadors for Liberate Bach International campaign